Again, welcome everyone to today's class. This is the final class in our series on the six perfections. So let's go ahead and get started with some prayers as usual. So again, when we recite these praises to the Buddha and so on, recall that we're just trying to align ourselves with these holy beings, especially also with our gurus, and wanting to receive their inspiration, their blessings, so we can accomplish all these same things that we're praising in the Buddha, as well as other beings. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Then we recollect some of the basic teachings of the Buddha with this verse. And then the second verse, I'll actually be teaching a little bit on this today, this verse from the Vajracutter, where we bring to mind the transitory nature of things as well as their empty nature, which is the whole topic we've been discussing these last few sessions. So let's recite these together. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we do a short mandala offering. Again, this is also about kind of creating that connection with the holy beings by making this vast, pure offering to them, with the intention, again, that we can receive their blessings and actualize all these teachings in our own minds, realizing them very deeply. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then, as usual, refuge and bodhichitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan, bringing to mind the thoughts in this verse. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye dupar shok. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye dupar shok. Okay, good. Thank you, Mary. All right, let's go ahead and do a little bit of meditation. As usual, just focusing on the breath for a few minutes to give ourselves a chance to focus the mind, calm the mind. Then on the basis of that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, work with the breath, whatever way suits your mind. And whenever you see that the mind has wandered, gently bring the mind back to the breath. So now let's set our motivation for today. And you may recall when we first uh, began this topic of the perfection of wisdom, we spoke about how there are three types, and the third type is the one we want to focus on in setting our motivation today. It was called the wisdom, knowing how to benefit others. And when we generate this mind of bodhicitta, we have to recognize that in our current state, we really don't know how best to benefit others. Even those people who are very close to us in our lives, we find it hard to help them at times when they're suffering, or to help to address their habits, their tendencies that are problematic for them. We know how limited we are in our own ability at this point. So when we talk about this wisdom that knows how to benefit others, this is something that will come when we do achieve much greater realizations, when we do have the ability to know the minds of others, to know their karma, their own predispositions, to know exactly what will be of benefit to them in that moment. You might even imagine what that would be like to live your life to where every being that you met, you knew exactly how to act towards them, what to say to them, how to be with them, to help them, to benefit them. This is what we're striving to achieve when we generate the mind of bodhicitta. Having been informed by our compassion and love for beings, our sincere wish that they not have another moment of suffering, that they only know true peace and happiness, we recognize that we have to develop ourselves in order to accomplish that for them. We have to cultivate our own inner qualities to the greatest degree, including our wisdom. And then in that state of Buddhahood, we can help them perfectly. So just set your mind on that sort of goal, envisioning that, what it would be like to achieve that state, and then generate the motivation to move in that direction. To think that we're here today examining this perfection of wisdom so that we can accomplish that. Without a doubt, we can be of the greatest benefit to each and every single sentient being through what we're doing here today. Okay, good. So what we just meditated on, we've touched on it here and there, but it's this idea of what we call skillful means, or upaya. Skillful means is the ability that we want to develop to be able to benefit each other sentient beings immediately, to know exactly what is needed. We see this in the life story of the Buddha, where he would meet with various people who were dealing with difficult situations, and he knew exactly how to help them, what words to say that would help unlock their minds, help them to develop a different understanding. So this is, again, I haven't really touched on skillful means as much as I wanted to during this course. Know that this perfection of wisdom, when it's presented as part of the 10 grounds, which is what we're talking about in the Wednesday night class, we'll get into the 10 grounds eventually, they add on 4 more perfections to go with the additional 4 grounds. So the first 6 grounds, you are perfecting the 6 that we've been looking at: generosity, ethics or morality, patience, then joyous effort, and then concentration, and then finally on the 6th ground, perfect the perfection of wisdom. And that's why in Master Chandrakirti's text, Supplement to the Middle Way, that's the longest chapter, because it's going into all of the ways that we develop this wisdom of emptiness. But it goes on then to talk about the perfection of prayer, the perfection of method or skillful means, perfection of what's the other one? I didn't have my notes out before today, but I thought of this as we were doing the meditation. Power. And then the 4th one is exalted wisdom. And I'm not sure the order might be a little different in some presentations. Again, we'll get into this on Wednesday night. But know that they say that these 4, prayer, skillful means or method, power, and exalted wisdom, are all subsets of wisdom. kind of like we know exactly how to work with our minds in terms of the power that we can have then to benefit others, the skillful way that we can help them on their path, even the prayers that we make that will ripen into, the various things that will be a benefit, are all informed by our wisdom. So it's kind of an interesting presentation in that regard. But again, on Wednesday night, we'll get into that eventually, probably a little bit later in the course. So let's get back into our slides and see where we're at to get grounded in today's class so that we then can finish off this perfection of wisdom today, as well as this course on transcending our limitations. So, oops, how did I get there? I know how I did it. Okay, let me, before I set it up, I set up a search for March because I wanted to get to the slide. This is all in one file. And I was teaching this class back in last March. So anyway, now I think I'm on the right one. Let's see. Okay. Let me go back to here and do my screen share again. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to end up at the perfection of ethics again. Okay. Oops. How did it do that? I think I have to get out of that one. That's the problem. Okay. I know what I'm going to do. This thing keeps popping around on my PowerPoint file. I'll just go right to the end because I don't have really too many more slides. I do have some things again that I want to share. Okay, let's just start there. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I thought I was all set up before class, but guess not. Okay. So again, I'm just going to refresh everyone's memory on the first few slides that I've been sharing for each of the perfections. I kind of did that, remind us of what we're talking about here. Generally, when we talk about wisdom, it is one of the mental factors, what we call the object determining mental factors, that's able to correctly discriminate the object of analysis. And this is, again, in the context of wisdom being accurate, actually looking at things correctly, which is, of course, the wisdom we want to develop. We don't want to develop any more afflicted wisdom, which we do possess currently. When this mind of wisdom is conjoined with bodhichitta motivation, it becomes a perfection of wisdom. And this is, of course, true for all of these. Anyone can practice concentration, can practice morality, can practice generosity. But unless you unite it with the mind of bodhicitta, it doesn't become a perfection of wisdom. And then, of course, that the practice of special insight, or laktong in Tibetan, vipassana in the Sanskrit, these are the minds that we want to develop. That is the cultivation, as it says here, of a particular type of wisdom. That is the wisdom discerning the true nature of phenomena. And again, we've been going through some teachings to help us to do that. We looked at the beginning at these types of wisdom. I mentioned the third type of wisdom in the meditation today. The first and the second have to do with the wisdom cognizing the ultimate and the wisdom that's cognizing the conventional. And I'm going to touch on those two aspects of reality in a moment to review those. That was what we ended with last week, was the two truths and this idea of two levels of reality that we can discern. So anyway, I'll get into that in a moment, but the root ignorance that we have that's driving the whole show, that's keeping us in samsara as well as keeping us unenlightened, is the ignorance that is misperceiving ourselves and all phenomena to exist inherently or intrinsically, to exist from their own side, to be able to set themselves up, to have their own identity, to exist independently. Again, different ways of describing that ignorance, what it is adhering to. But it is adhering to a false object. Again, it's not just the not knowing how things exist, it's the ignorance thinking that things exist in a fictitious way that we can refute through analysis. Therefore, we have to go on to the next topic, and we touched on that briefly, that we have to understand the two types of selflessness. Selflessness of persons, and there we primarily work with the I, the person in our own continuum, and then selflessness of phenomena, which is everything other than persons. And why it's divided that way is because we do have at the root of our problems the grasping at the I, the self-grasping that is keeping us bound up in our own stuff. Because once we are clinging to that strong sense of an I, we then have all of these problems with the experiences in samsara and develop attachment and anger and pride and jealousy and all the other things. And that's what's keeping us mostly bound in samsara. So that's the one that we should start with. And again, it is also said that it's a little bit easier to realize the selflessness or emptiness of the person because we recognize that there is a dependency. In order for us to even know a person, to see a person, something else has to appear. It does depend upon the body generally is how we identify others, but the mind is also there. And that when that mind and body are there, then we can see that there's the basis for a person. So it's a little bit easier, I think, to see the selflessness of persons. And then we can go on to apply the same understanding with regard to all other phenomena, to computers, and even to our bodies. Again, our bodies are not the person. A body is a phenomenon that is other than the person. To books, to whatever it is, and especially those objects that we have strong emotions towards, and kind of undermine our adherence to them, reifying them in that way that ignorance does. Then we went on to these two analyses, the reasoning of dependent arising and the four-point analysis. I'm not going to review those today, but know that I mentioned last week, and I might emphasize it again, is that when we do the four-point analysis and we get to a place where we are seeing to some degree the emptiness of the I, or if we're using it with another phenomenon, we can do that. But when we get to that place where we're realizing the emptiness, to make sure it doesn't go over into that nihilistic bent, these two extremes again that we waver between to some degree when we start doing this analysis. To make sure it doesn't fall into that, we can use the reasoning of dependent arising to reaffirm that things do exist. Things exist in this very subtle way. And it's very hard to get to that place of the complete understanding of that. Perhaps we won't even have that real, genuine understanding of what that means for things to exist in mere name only. But when we do come around from having realized emptiness at the most profound way, when we have that direct non-conceptual wisdom realizing emptiness, which will happen in all of our futures at some point, we will have that sort of moving over from one side, the mundane side, to the super mundane side. Once we achieve that, when you come out of your meditative equipoise, your meditation session on that, you know that everything is false in terms of how it appears and how it exists are not in alignment, and you understand how things exist in this very, very subtle way. So again, this is something that we will understand over time, but we can already formulate a lot of conceptualization around this, and that's what our reasonings are intended to do, is to help us to work with the idea of emptiness, the concept of emptiness, and eventually to realize it in this non-conceptual way, this direct way. So again, there are other techniques that are taught. I didn't go into them as part of this class. If you're curious about that, you might go to the session that I taught last fall. I think it was it fall or spring? I'm losing track of time with the pandemic, but the course that was on the Sword of Manjushri, where we went through different verses that give us additional analyses, and even know that Chandrakirti goes into a much deeper way of looking at that four-point analysis. Instead of just saying there are two options, he kind of divides those into some permutations. So he comes up with a sevenfold reasoning that's really quite juicy to work with. But again, if you have any curiosity about some of those, know that there are sources to examine different ways of approaching emptiness. But the two main ones, again, are recognizing that things are dependent arisings, therefore they cannot have any independent existence. And then, of course, analyzing for that inherently existent object, especially the inherently existent I that we cling to so tightly, and coming to understand that it can't possibly exist. There is no way for it to exist because we cannot find something that is it. And that would be the nature of something that exists inherently. It would be findable, it would be locatable, it would be something that would set itself up. And the more we investigated, the more obvious it would become. And instead, it's the exact opposite. The more we investigate, the more elusive it becomes. And we come to see that it doesn't exist at all. So, again, this is something we have to work with over time. Once we have developed some understanding of emptiness and the way that things exist in a kind of a conventional mode, we can come to some knowledge of the two truths. And as I said, you won't really fully understand the two truths in their deepest way until you come out of that meditative session where you realize emptiness directly, non-conceptually. But let's look at what I shared last week for the two truths. These are the more or less definitions that come from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. I'll talk a little bit more about conventional truth perhaps today, but conventional truth, what is true to a valid conventional consciousness. This is, as it says there, true on one level in that we do designate things through our mere imputation. We decide what we're going to call a computer, what we're going to call a phone, what we're going to call a person, a dog, a tree, a flower. All of these various phenomena, they exist in a valid way to some degree by virtue of us naming them, but because of this whole process whereby they appear to be inherently existent and we grasp at them as inherently existent through our ignorance, we are obscured to the ultimate nature of those phenomena. We don't stop, as that, that little process that I shared earlier in this course about what Rinpoche says, that the basis for something appears to us, such as, again, I guess I can keep using this little metal bowl, the one that I ring when I, start the sessions and what have you. So when a basis appears to us and we learn the initial label for it or conceive of it in some way and go, oh, and we put that sort of label on mentally or through our language, as soon as we've done that first step, then all that's happened is we've merely labeled it. But it appears back to us as if it's not merely labeled, as if metal bowl or singing bowl or whatever term you want to use for this, as if it's sort of embedded in the base here, as if it's one with that. It's got its own identity then, and its identity then shines back at us in a sense, and we adhere to that. So we have a threefold process. We merely designate it, it appears back as if it's real, and then we grasp at it as if it is real, as if it exists out here on its own. And this is what the whole process is that we're getting involved in. We have to begin by undermining this ignorance that thinks that this is real, that thinks that the identity of this exists out here on this basis. And we can do that again through those analyses. In the end, the very subtlest thing that we have to remove from our minds is not just that grasping at that, but this false appearance, which is arising from seeds or imprints within our own minds. We're going to get into this on Wednesday night in the class. That was the final topic I wanted to share last Wednesday that I didn't get to, is really defining these obscurations that we have in our minds. The biggest one is the ignorance that's grasping at all of that. But the subtler one that we eventually have to remove is this false appearance that keeps things appearing to exist in a way that is contrary to how they actually exist. So that was the meaning of this idea when we talk about conventional truth. Let me put the definition back up on the board or on the screen. What is true to a valid conventional consciousness is true on that level of it just being merely designated, merely imputed, our way of organizing our world. But because of the process that happens here and how we identify what we call conventional truths, we're obscured to its emptiness. We're obscured to the fact that it doesn't exist from its own side, that it actually is merely imputed. So again, you won't really understand how things are mere conventionalities until well, much further down the path. And certainly once you come out of that meditation where you've realized emptiness directly, you know that everything around you, yourself, all phenomena, exist as mere imputations. They have what we would call nominal existence only. They exist through name, through concept. There's no other way that they exist. And that's because you've realized ultimate truth, the ultimate nature of reality, meaning the final nature when we do that deeper investigation, the emptiness of inherent existence of each and every phenomenon. So these two kind of exist together on everything that is established. So when I was holding that bowl up, that bowl is what we are designating, merely imputing as a bowl, and it's together with the emptiness of bowl. The emptiness of bowl being the fact that it doesn't have any inherent existence, that it doesn't exist from its own side. These two truths are inextricably bound up with regard to everything that exists. So we talk about, that phrase from the Heart Sutra, right? Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I mentioned this earlier. What we're talking about that is how these two truths are together, that you can't have something we call form without its emptiness. And you can't have the emptiness of form without the form being there. This is how emptiness exists. Emptiness isn't this kind of big, thick soup that everything's floating in. Emptiness is the specific characteristic of everything that exists. And we're talking there in terms of what we find through ultimate analysis. Conventional analysis, you can find all kinds of things about this bowl, right? You can find its roundness and its the well and the depth of it and the color of it and the texture of it and all these various things about it that we can identify conceptually. And conventionally, there's no problem with kind of saying we identify all of those things. But here we're looking kind of at a deeper level. What is there a real bowl here? How does bowl exist in reality in the deepest level of investigation? And that's what we get at with the ultimate truth, when we discern that it is together with its emptiness. At all times, it is empty of inherent existence. This is an unchanging quality. As long as bowl exists, the emptiness of bowl exists. As long as you exist, the emptiness of you exists. So the emptiness of dawn, I think I mentioned this earlier, starts when dawn is designated. There was, I don't know if my parents named me before I was born or not. Maybe some people do that, right? They come up with the name. But they once there's a designation to that phenomenon, that is the person who was in the womb, who came out of my mother's womb and was a little screaming baby and what have you. I was a little fat little baby. They called me Butterball. the so they had these other designations for me. But anyway, the dawn, this phenomenon that's called dawn, or Donald is my full name. Donald was this phenomenon that will exist as long as the aggregates are supported for this base, as a basis for Donald. Once the consciousness leaves this body and the body is left behind to become worm food, well, then Donald ceases to exist. From the moment Donald was designated to exist till the moment that Donald ceases to exist, the emptiness of Donald exists. So it is also, in that way, I wouldn't say it's conditioned, but it is arising together with the phenomenon that it is pertaining to. And then emptiness disappears at that point, the emptiness of dawn. But of course, the consciousness that is with dawn in this existence goes on to the next existence, becomes an intermediate state being. We could talk about the emptiness of that intermediate state being and so on. And then I take rebirth and I go on to the emptiness of whatever I'm going to be in my next life. There's always going to be an emptiness with regard to whatever phenomenon is posited, whatever phenomenon is determined. But emptiness is a characteristic then of all things, and it arises together with those phenomena. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. We're not making them an exact equation. It's not saying form equals emptiness, because form is different than emptiness, but they can exist together. And that's the only way they exist, is together. And we can differentiate them simply through our conceptualization. And through our conceptualization, we can look at it and say, oh, now I'm discerning form, which is the conventional mode of things existing. And then I look at it from my ultimate analysis and I say, but that form is empty of inherent existence. So there is never any phenomenon established whatsoever that isn't established together with its emptiness, at least, in terms of how we would look at it through this type of analysis. Okay. I noticed there was one comment. Let me actually pull that up before I go back to this form. These are the parts of emptiness. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These are the parts of emptiness. We don't really use the term parts of emptiness. What we'd say is they are specific instances of emptiness that we're talking about. So this whole phrase in the Heart Sutra is set up with regard to what are called the five aggregates, and form is the first one, right? We have form, and then the other four are mental, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors. Those are all the mental factors. These two are isolated, feeling and discrimination, because they are pretty involved in our problems. But these are all the mental factors. And then we have the fifth one is consciousness. So those are all mental. We're going to set those aside. Form is the first one that Avalokiteshvara deals with in the Heart Sutra. And he says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So what he's saying is that form and its emptiness coexist. The emptiness of form and form coexist. That would be a better way to maybe phrase it rather than is. So we're not talking about a part of emptiness per se. I mean, we could say that emptiness has temporal parts and what have you. We're more or less talking about an instance of emptiness, which is the emptiness of form. So every one of these aggregates can be delineated in the same way. Feeling is emptiness, emptiness is feelings. And what we're simply saying is that any phenomenon that we designate, that we have a proper basis for and we establish as existent, is together with its emptiness, with that instance of emptiness. Just like I was pointing out how there is an emptiness of dawn that started when dawn was designated till when dawn ceases to exist. There's an emptiness with regard to every one of you as well. There's an emptiness with regard to every single part of your body that you've identified, your eyes, your ears, your nose, every single hair on your head. Everything is together with its emptiness because everything lacks inherent existence. So again, this is just how everything is established, that there are instances of emptiness with regard to everything that exists. We could say there are infinite instances of emptiness. But there's no one big thing we call emptiness. We talk about emptiness in general as sort of a generic sort of idea of it to get at what it is, but you have to talk about a specific basis for that emptiness. And that's why the conventional and the ultimate truths kind of coexist. As I said, they're sort of inextricably bound up with regard to every single phenomenon that exists. You have the phenomenon that we posit as existing through our conventional awareness and its emptiness. And you'll never, see those two separate. When this ceases to exist, that will cease to exist. As long as this is existing, that exists. Like, getting it kind of to some degree. So I don't know, the term parts of emptiness, I don't know that I would use that term in this context. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. And again, if there are additional questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll deal with them either throughout the class or at the very end when we look at questions. So tonight, I don't know why I said tonight. Today, what I want to do is to talk a little bit about this illusory nature of things then, because Lama Zopa really emphasizes this a lot. Because if we become quite aware of how things have these sort of qualities, we then can quickly identify what is the object of negation. We're trying to refute that things have a mode of existence that seems to be self-established. We want to begin to see that things are illusory, that they're like a dream. So we have this wonderful verse from the Vajracutter Sutra, which we read at our teaching sessions generally, especially on Sunday, where we have 9 similes. Each line contains 3, and then the final line it says, see conditioned things as such. These are all conditioned things. These are all things that do arise from their causes and conditions. And when Rinpoche teaches on these, he does talk about some of these being seen from the point of view of their causes and conditions. And that's perfectly fine. Why? Because once more, when we go back to the 3 levels of dependent arising, remember when I talked about that, we have the first level of arising from causes and conditions, dependent upon causes and conditions. Secondly, that things depend upon their parts. And thirdly, that things depend upon that mere designation, mere imputation. And as I said then, all 3 of those point to emptiness. The lower schools and even in conventional reality, people have pretty strong confidence in cause and effect when it comes to the physical world, right? They know that you have to do certain things to get certain results. If here we are, we're getting closer to our springtime. Springtime seems to be coming. At some point, maybe about 2 months from now, we'll start thinking about a garden or something. You know that if you have a plot of land and you want vegetables and fruits and whatever at the end of that, well, then you have to spend the time doing all the things that are necessary to create that. You can't just keep looking out your window and going, "Oh, there's no vegetables coming up. Oh, there's nothing coming up from my garden." Well, did you plant anything? No. Well, then you didn't create the causes. So we have great confidence in the world with regard to cause and effect, but we don't see that the fact that things arise from causes and conditions means that they don't have any independent existence, means that they can't set themselves up. You have to kind of be exposed to this level of philosophical inquiry to get what it means for things to arise from causes and conditions. If the phenomenon is dependent upon causes and conditions, it doesn't exist on its own. It can't set itself up. It is only, again, what we are designating it as that part of this whole process. I think I mentioned this previously as well, but in the one analysis that's used in Chandrakirti's text that gets into how things are produced, they use the idea of a seed and a sprout. Well, a seed is that thing, again, we put in the ground, and we know that at some point that shell of the seed begins to break open and the matter inside of it, based on moisture and nutrients and heat and whatever else is involved, begins to sprout out. It becomes what we would call a sprout. Well, that is a continuity of the seed. The seed has ceased to exist, not utterly though, or else the sprout couldn't exist. But now you have a sprout that is arising from that seed, and we're designating that. And then the sprout will cease to exist when it becomes more of a plant or whatever we'd want to call it, once it's above the surface and what have you. So again, we have this whole causal process where we're simply designating little moments in this, and all of them are dependent upon each other. So we don't ever have anything existing independently. Just because things arise from causes and conditions is enough to prove that they don't have any inherent existence. But nonetheless, when we come to understand the third level of dependent arising, as I was saying, that things are merely imputed. We're just calling this a seed. We're just calling this a sprout. We're just calling this a plant. We're just calling this a bush or whatever, all the various labels that we give to things. These are the way that things exist in their subtlest way, but it's all part and parcel of the same process of coming to understand that phenomena cannot exist independently. So I'm going to go through these and then we'll see what questions people have in regard to this, or because there were two places where I found this. Rinpoche taught extensively on this at the Light of the Path retreats, and that's most of what I'm going to use. But in his new book, he does have a little bit on this verse. He doesn't go into each of these 9, though. But I like the way he explained the first one. So he says, the first image, uh, I think I've got the wrong wording there, that the Buddha uses is a star in daytime. So, in the daytime, sometimes when the sun's just coming up, you might still see stars on the horizon, right? Because the sky is dark enough. But once it's like it is right now with the sun up in the sky, you don't see stars, right? Because the sun is too bright, even though the star is there, we cannot see it. It is too subtle an object for us to see. In the same way, everything is empty of existing inherently, but we cannot see this because it is much too subtle. So this is Rinpoche's way of, again, kind of setting out this example in the context of things are there. Emptiness of everything is there because everything that exists, as I was just explaining, is together with its emptiness, but it's too subtle for us to see. So if we see things through the lens of saying, my computer is like a star, it has this emptiness of inherent existence that abides with it for the entire duration of when my computer came into existence to when it is out of existence, but it's something very subtle that I cannot see. Well, then that reminds us that there is that truth to it, that computer is emptiness, emptiness is computer, or whatever, however we want to frame that. Again, but this idea of a star, this is the way that he expresses it in this teaching. And I think it's really quite effective if we, begin to have that understanding that everything we look at is together with that emptiness. Kind of reminds us, but it is quite subtle, very hard for us to see. The second one was a visual aberration. By this we mean kind of when you have a defective view in your eye due to cataracts, where you might see things that are not actually in the space in front of you. They're appearing to your eye consciousness because of the fault in the eye. Sometimes it's also, maybe I'll take it off screen to show this. One teacher said, like, even if you don't do this really hard, but gently press on your eye, you see how you get kind of two two computers or two phones in front of you, kind of doubles up the vision, right? So you see that there's just a visual aberration that's appearing to make it seem like there's two computer screens in front of you, but there aren't two computer screens in front of you. It's just a temporary visual aberration. Another one that's pointed out is I've never had jaundice. They say if you have jaundice, you see things with a yellow hue, right? It does have an effect on the eye consciousness, even because the skin will turn yellow, all these various things with jaundice. So just know that that's various examples that they point out of what we mean by visual aberration. So when having a defective view, which is what Rinpoche sometimes calls this, what appears to you seems real, but it is not. Similarly, causative phenomena, conditioned phenomena, appear to be truly existent, but are not. Again, this is another way of reminding us that we do have a visual aberration that is happening, whether we have jaundice, whether we're, cataracts or whatever. We have this mistaken view that is appearing to us. As I was mentioning earlier, as soon as we designate something, it's like what we've given it in terms of its identity merges into the phenomenon, or the basis, and then the basis and the phenomenon we've designated seem like they're one, and they appear back to us as if they're real. But they don't exist that way at all. Again, we find that through our analyses. So everything is like having this visual aberration occurring. A flame of a lamp, and this is where one of them that's a bit more just about the conditioning that's involved. In Tibet, they have these butter lamps that are made from yak butter, and they just scoop the butter into a metal bowl and put a wick inside, and then it burns. and exist dependent upon many causes and conditions, right? You have all the causes and conditions that led to the yak butter being there. You have to make yak butter. You have to have yaks to make yak butter. You have to feed the yaks to make yak butter. All the various things involved in that, for the wick to be there, for the flame to be there, for the bowl. I mean, you have a lot of things involved in just a flame of a lamp being produced. All compounded phenomena are the same, not existing on their own. Why? Because they depend upon those causes and conditions. A flame of a lamp doesn't exist on its own. It is a dependent arising. All the various factors that contribute to it give it its existence. Therefore, it doesn't have any independent existence. And we'll see some of these other ones that are similar, that are mostly about conditions, causes and conditions, as opposed to looking at them as an illusion that's occurring, which is this next one, an illusion. This is like an illusion conjured by a magician and falsely believed by the audience. True existence appears, but does not exist in reality. So the example here, and of course, I don't know, I mean, in our day and age, we do have magicians who conjure up illusions. And perhaps some of you have seen some of those things in person and been totally dumbfounded by something appearing to exist before you that wasn't there at all. In the time of the Buddha, apparently there were these magicians who would take like a stick and a rock, and they would have them on a table, and they would have some sort of a magical substance that they would put on the eyes of everyone in the room, and they would cast this sort of spell then through some mantra, and everyone in the room who was in the room at that time when this spell was cast would have a vision of like a horse and an elephant appearing there where there was only a stick and a rock. And so this type of a magician's illusion is used often in different tenet systems, and especially in ours, to indicate this false appearance that once more things can appear in a way that is contrary to how they actually exist. Again, we're not trying to reify the stick and the stone by saying that there is only this illusion of these other things appearing there, but they're real at that level, because nothing is real at any level in the Prasangika Madhyamaka. But we're saying that things are like this. They have an illusory quality. They seem to exist on their own. They seem to be self-established. They seem to be real. Again, to use Rinpoche's word, he uses this very often to talk about the object of negation. They seem to be real. It seems like I have a real bowl in my hand. But again, we can find through our analysis that there is no real bowl in my hand, because when I try to find that inherently existent bowl, that independently existent bowl, it doesn't exist. An illusion conjures up the same type of idea. We go looking for something that appears to exist through an illusion that is cast upon us, and we are unable to find it. In the same way, everything that appears to us has this illusory quality. It appears to exist, but in a particular way, but it doesn't exist in that way. And I think it is important that we qualify that. Here I've added a few additional comments from Rinpoche in the new book on the Six Perfections. I'm calling it new now. It's been out for a while, but another simile, he says, used in the Vajrakutter Sutra is an illusion. Here we need to be careful. The Prasangika philosophers, again, this is the branch of the middle way, the Madhyamaka, that we are dealing with in our school, in our system, in Tibetan Buddhism. All four Tibetan schools posit Prasangika Madhyamaka as being the highest view of emptiness, selflessness. The philosophers in that branch of the middle way tell us that life is like an illusion, not that life is an illusion. All of the similes used in the verse point to ways we can view our life, but they do not tell us that there is no reality to life, that it is a total fantasy. So Rinpoche is just emphasizing that, and that would be a nihilistic kind of view, right? If we think, oh, it's just an illusion, it doesn't matter, I can do whatever I want, I can, kill this person and do that and get whatever I want because it's an illusion. Well, it's not an illusion. It's like an illusion. It appears to exist in one way, but it doesn't exist in that way that it appears. It does exist, as we saw with the reasoning of dependent arising. And what we're seeing in these similes, that things do come into existence on the basis of various factors. So then there's the dew or drop of dew. Rinpoche says dewdrops, this isn't directly his words, but they're adapted from the oral commentary he gave at Light of the Path retreat, I think in 2009. Dewdrops can appear at any time and are thus not definite. In the same way, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent and can cease at any time. So we even get a little bit of a reminder when we contemplate the impermanent nature of things. It reminds us of that transitory, fleeting quality that we can't rely upon, which of course also points in the direction of lacking inherent existence, but nonetheless is also something we need to be in tune with, because anything in our conditioned world can cease at any time. This is the nature of things. His Holiness says, just because they come into existence, by virtue of that, they will go out of existence to some degree. They will have some change. Whoops, I hit the wrong button here. Let me go back to, I was going to do a stop share and talk about that, but decided to keep it on the screen. The sixth one, a bubble. A water bubble looks very beautiful, but can pop at any time and cannot be trusted. Likewise, no matter how beautiful they appear, all causative phenomena are impermanent. Again, similar to the last one, just that transitory, fleeting nature. Lama Tsongkhapa, in one of his texts, The Foundation of All Good Qualities, he talks about how this life is like a water bubble. That's something to remember, that this life can be over like that. We know that this happens. We've seen it happen to people that we know or in the news, what have you. One moment you're there, the next moment, some accident, some health issue, and you're gone. This is the nature of things. A dream. This is my favorite analogy, and I use it quite frequently. And for me, it works the best. But again, if every one of you, as we go through these 9, you might find something that works better for you, and that's perfectly fine. Rinpoche talks about how everything that appears in a dream isn't real in the terms of our waking reality, right? It's not that it's not appearing at all, because we do have dream appearances. You can testify to them when you get up in the morning and go, wow, I dreamt about blah, 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 blah. Well, that was real within a dream state, but it's not real in a waking state. Like this, all things are not real, not existing from their own side. So I think this is another one that we need to be careful with when we say things are like a dream. We don't mean that it is a dream. And we use the term the awakened one, Buddha, to refer to those beings who've woken up from the dream of existence, but it doesn't mean that this existence has the same level of kind of fiction going on that our dream states do. When you're in your dream state, I'm not saying you're not creating any kind of karma in your dreams, but the karma you create is pretty indeterminate, because you're not dealing with proper basis for generating that karma. It's only being generated at a mental level. So we can see attachment arises in dreams, anger arises in dreams, fear arises in dreams, a lot of emotions arise in dreams, but they aren't based on real situations. They're only based on what our dream consciousness is conjuring up. Those things don't have that reality, and we know that when we wake up and suddenly all the desire that we had for a dream object is gone, or the fear that we are experiencing in a nightmare is over, because we are out of that state where that was appearing as real and we were adhering to it. Well, in our waking state, things are appearing as real and we're adhering to it too. This is how it's like a dream, because we have the same types of emotions. And of course, what's worse is in our waking state, we actually create much more karma that is much more lasting and provides results than what we do in our dream state. Our dream karma is in that category of not definite to be experienced, because it's generally, again, not dealing with real objects. We still should try to maintain our morality in our dreams as best as we can, not do things in our dreams that encourage behavior that we would do outside of our dreams, because that's the problem. If we, don't have any sort of moral control even in our dreams, that can be feeding into our lack of control in the waking state. But in the waking state, we believe in everything as being real. It appears real to us, and we adhere to it, and we create karma in relation to it much more effectively than we do in the dream state. So this is something to keep in mind, again, that things are like a dream, but they aren't a dream, because there is a huge difference between your dream state and your waking state. And just to recall that. Okay, let's go back to the next of these similes examples. Lightning, a flash of lightning. A flash of lightning happens, but the next moment it is gone, right? They even had a title of one of His Holiness's books on the Shantideva's text that was called "A Flash of Lightning in the Dark." It's how this human life is often talked about. It's just like a flash of lightning. It comes and then it's over. This life and all conditioned things are similar in their impermanence. So this one too, once more, speaks to the impermanent nature of these things, that they arise from causes and conditions. But once more, that points us in the same direction of understanding emptiness. Because if things existed inherently, they wouldn't depend upon these other factors. They wouldn't be conditioned, and they would abide. They would kind of, be there. They would have some sort of lasting quality, you know. So again, this is the inherent nature of things can be inferred from some of these similes, even though they're not dealing with that idea of things having an illusory quality, like the illusion itself, the dream, uh, and so on. And even this last one is more in line with kind of the idea of impermanence. We see things as a cloud. Well, clouds appear in the sky, but they change and even disappear, right? You can look up at the cloud one moment, and then you're doing something else, and you look up and go, where did that cloud go? And sometimes they dissipate, the moisture evaporates. Sometimes they move on, what have you. But like clouds, all things are subject to change and do not last. So we see again that these similes are pointing us in the direction of various ways that things can be perceived as being not quite real in the way we think they are. We don't know their reality, sometimes even at a conventional level in terms of understanding their impermanence, but at a deeper level in terms of seeing that they don't exist inherently, that they are empty of that. One book that Gil Gagnon gave me a copy of this, and it's really kind of a nice book. I haven't read it from cover to cover, but it's called 12 Examples of Illusion by Jan Westerhoff. 12 examples of illusion. And he points out a few others in here. Then Rinpoche even talked about one of these. The one that's often used is a mirage, right? And we know that from our living in the Southwest, right? If you ever go out on some of these stretches of road where there's just this huge stretch of road in front of you, and you can see up in front of you on a summer day when the sun's bearing down what appears to be water, and you can know from the first time you saw it and someone said, no, that's not water, that's a mirage, that you are seeing something that appears to exist in a way that is contrary to how it actually exists, because you got to those places, you drove to those places, and the water wasn't there, and the water was up ahead, and then you drove to the next place and the water's still up ahead. We never get to the water. The mirage appears to be water, but it isn't. Another one that's used that's in here is a reflection of a face in a mirror, which of course most of us, we learned at a very young age that a reflection in the mirror is not a real face. We come to understand that that's just the reflective image of our face. But there are still times in even adult life, sometimes perhaps, where you're frightened by something that appears in a mirror that you weren't expecting, because you didn't know that there was a mirror there, for example. If you ever check into like a hotel room and suddenly, you look and there's a mirror right across or something, and you see something, and it's maybe from the hallway or what have you. But so there is, with the idea of a reflection once more, it's not real as a face. It is only a reflection of a face. It has that illusory quality. So again, these different illusions, it's an interesting little book. An echo is another one that he has in here. When we hear an echo, there's that little, what are they called, that chamber thing that's up near Abiquiu, past Abiquiu, that you have amphitheater kind of thing. I don't know, where the rocks where you can yell into it and your echo comes back. And the echo sounds like it's your real voice. Of course, it's the reverberation of the molecules that have come back. It's not a real person that's there yelling at you or saying the things that you said. Rather, it is just the echo of the voice. Those are the main ones that are in here that are a little bit different from what we had. There's the one that's about the city of Gandharvas, which are the smell eaters, and I'm not going to get into that one. But anyway, know that the Buddha used a lot of these. And why do we want to kind of, again, have them as part of our repertoire of the various things that we use when we are working with emptiness? Because they help us in the moment to recall that things are having this false appearance. So we don't get so caught up in it, so that we don't even believe in it if we can muster up that level of understanding of emptiness, so that we get that what we are caught up in is this illusion. Everything in this world having this false appearance. And we have to, again, begin by diminishing our confidence in that, our believing in that, which we do through our reasonings and emptiness. But we can also have some of this understanding that goes, wow, and what's appearing out here as if it's so real isn't real in that way at all. So these are very powerful. It's kind of interesting. The Vajrakuta Sutra is an interesting little sutra, and Geshe-la is going to be teaching on it, I think. Correct, Mary? Isn't that correct? I think so.
It's on the list to do. Absolutely, Gendon. It's on the
Yeah,
list for him to teach and give a lug on it in September once
wonderful.
we're back in the center.
Yeah. Wonderful. So again, there's a lot to the Vajrakuta Sutra in terms of all these various things that that the Buddha is saying and so on. But it's this little verse at the very end that Rinpoche emphasizes and that we can use as a very powerful tool to help undermine again that confidence that we have in things that is misplaced. Things don't have that quality. So every time that we, reinvest in that by affirming that through our own ignorance, we are just getting further and further away from our own liberation and enlightenment. Whereas every time we undermine it through these types of thoughts, we become closer and closer to having that wisdom realizing emptiness. So another one that we could certainly use in our day and age, which the Buddha, the televisions weren't there or movie screens at the time of the Buddha, right? But now we have these, we go to the movie theaters. Nobody's really going to movie theaters perhaps these days, but you have this whole thing that's projected on a screen, right? It's just a white screen with little flecks of colored light, that are giving an image of various people doing various things. It's an illusion, right? And many people go to the movies and get really caught up in the emotion of it. I mean, I felt so, I'll admit, I was one of those people who cried at E.T., and I felt so manipulated by Steven Spielberg. But anyway, when, when you sit in a movie theater and, you go through this emotional experience, and you have this kind of it's all on the basis of what? Light being projected on a white sheet, essentially. And, the voices and everything. And I'm not saying there are certainly many other causes and conditions that led to that being there. The actors and all the technicians, all the people who are in the credits, right? As well as many other factors that are involved in it. But it's an illusion, and maybe again, children, when they first see a television screen or a movie, they think it's real. Animals certainly do sometimes. One of my cats really loves whenever there's a nature show with birds on it. She'll come up on the TV, and anyway. So we see that again, there's an illusion happening there. That's another way to just remind us, that whenever we see things that we are adhering to in that way, we go, it's just like television. It's like a movie. Remember, it's like a movie. It isn't a movie, and that is just a fictional experience. This is as real as it gets, folks, and that's as real as it is, So let's take our little break. I have like 11:01. Let's go till 11:12, and I'll ring the bell again here from, so keep your speaker on and round you up at that time. Okay, everyone have a good break. Okay, good. All right, let's deal with some of the questions that are in the box. Amanda asked, could you talk about how aspiration is connected to the causes and conditions needed for understanding? Well, when we actually looked at this factor of aspiration came up in the context of concentration as well. You might recall that there were three things that sort of preceded the final antidote to laziness. Of course, aspiration is a part of that. But the final antidote to laziness that we saw in the context of the teachings on concentration was when you develop a real serviceability of body and mind, what we call pliancy, where you can do whatever you wish in terms of your virtuous practice with your body and mind. There's no longer any of those sorts of obstacles. But there were three factors that preceded that. And the very first one is faith. And by faith in Buddhism, again, we don't mean a kind of blind faith where we're just saying, oh, I believe in the Buddha, I believe in the Buddha, I believe in the Buddha. It's a faith that we actually investigate into the teachings. We get very clear about what they are. We begin to develop some movement towards wanting to actualize those in our own minds. What we might call a wishing faith. And then we actually gain greater conviction in things through our own practice of the Dharma. So when we talk about emptiness, faith in emptiness, well, it's not again like you just sit there and, oh, I beve in emptiness, I believe in emptiness. That's going to get you there. You have to actually begin to clearly know what emptiness is referring to through these types of teachings, teachings from great masters. I always recommend getting teachings from Rinpoche, His Holiness, other people who've realized emptiness much more than I have. I haven't barely an intellectual understanding of it, and that's even, giving myself probably too much credit. But the idea is that we have to first get really clear about what the teachings on emptiness are about. Then we have to also develop some desire, some wish to realize that ourselves already. That's a bit of an aspiration, but it becomes more solid in a moment when I talk about that next factor. The third level of faith is where you start to see it yourself through these types of investigations that I've been talking about, where you begin to get a taste for it and you go, oh, I can begin to see how things maybe are, there's something false going on here. They aren't real in the way they appear. There's something that I'm discerning about that. So again, that's what we talk about in terms of that first factor of faith. At least to even have the conviction that this is a truth that we can realize. That's already, amazing faith that, will benefit you greatly. But then it has to be combined with aspiration. And aspiration, the factor that Amanda is speaking to, this is where we have that desire to move in a particular direction, to say, okay, I'm going to actually realize emptiness. I'm going to do whatever I can in this life to develop my understanding of it, to read books about it, which is the next question. I'll get to that in a moment. To meditate on it, to do everything that I can to support my own development of this wisdom. Okay, then what comes after aspiration, wanting to move in that direction with some faith and conviction in emptiness and its teachings and the teachings on it, is your actual effort, your actual endeavor, putting enthusiastic perseverance, just going through it. I mean, it isn't easy to realize emptiness, but nonetheless, if with perseverance, we can realize that. Remember, there's that wonderful story in the Lam Rim. I can't remember the name of the monk who the Buddha, he lived at the time of the Buddha, and he seemed to be very dull-witted. He didn't really have the ability to sit in a philosophical teaching and develop some understanding. And so the Buddha gave him the job of cleaning the gompa, the meditation hall. And so he would sweep on the left side and get away all the dirt, and then it would all be on the right side, and then he would sweep on the right side, and it would all be on the left side. And he kept doing this. And it sounds like torture maybe to some people, but this was how he clarified all of his obstacles and how he eventually had these great realizations through just, again, kind of acknowledging that he just needed to continue to put effort into various things that would help loosen it all up, and eventually it would fall into place. So even somebody who was that kind of dull in their faculties can attain these great realizations. And I'm going to have a few quotes from Rinpoche where he talks about the necessity of combining your meditation on emptiness or whatever meditations we're doing with the accumulation of merit and the purification and all these other things, So aspiration plays a key role in terms of any of our spiritual endeavors. Again, it's presented often in the context of developing an antidote to our laziness. And recall that laziness isn't just the manana mentality that we have in New Mexico so much. It's also the attachment we have to all of our worldly affairs and thinking those are so much more important that we put time and energy into rather than our spiritual progress. And then also our tendency to think that we're not able to achieve these things. And that's something to really, counteract in regard to these emptiness teachings in particular, is that may be a form of laziness that some of you might succumb to, is thinking, these teachings are just too complex. And Don's speaking too fast. I apologize that sometimes I speak fast. I still think Venerable Rabina has me by quite a distance. I mean, she could she could talk me into the ground. So, and I'm saying that with all respect. But the idea is that, if you get that sort of mentality that thinks, emptiness, it's just too complicated. I read books on it and my mind just, my eyes glaze over and I fall asleep and I can't understand any of it. And I sit down to meditate and I just can't get any idea what this is all about. And then you start thinking, I'm one of these people that's never going to realize emptiness. Well, there aren't any people who are never going to realize emptiness. So you're not one of them. Everyone eventually will realize emptiness. Everything we do in this life, none of it's lost. Everything we're doing in these classes are planting seeds or moistening the water a little bit or whatever analogy you want to use. It's to help us to eventually grow that realization. So aspiration is a key part of it. Develop some faith through your deep investigation of these teachings, develop some aspiration to want to move in that direction, and then you have to put the effort in. mean, this whole idea of like the lazy llama or whatever, where there's like, all you do is just sit down and you're going to have these instant realizations. Um, no, I think you have to put work in. I think the Buddha showed this in his own life. It took his 6 years of unbelievable, you know, dedication to practice and doing all these ascetic practices, going to this extreme, in regard to that, and then coming back and reinvigorating his body and his mind, and then doing the deeper work of investigating the nature of things. And he eventually did attain it. But we all have to do the same. And of course, that's just the life story of the Buddha, where he exemplifies showing enlightenment. He, had been doing work for countless eons before that on the Bodhisattva path. It takes a lot to achieve these realizations, but don't let that discourage you. If you keep your faith in this, you keep generating that aspiration. Part of it is your aspiration even of bodhicitta, that contributes to your strong desire then to want to move in this direction, to realize emptiness. And then just put the effort in, and it'll happen. So again, in terms of what books I would recommend, there's a really wonderful book by Geshe Jampa Tekchok called Insight into Emptiness, but it's a little more advanced. If you feel like you're at that level where you've had a number of teachings on emptiness and are curious about kind of little bit more scholarly approach to it, but not like Jeffrey Hopkins meditation on emptiness kind of thing, this one is a good one to set as a goal. And maybe you might pick it up and go, this seems a little too heady, and then you might have to dial it back a little. The one that we use in discovering Buddhism is really, really good, and that's How to See Yourself as You Really Are by His Holiness and Jeffrey Hopkins. They made that into I call it like your introductory text to emptiness. It's still a little complicated, but the way that they approach it and the little meditations at the end, I shared some of those with you. They really are quite helpful. And so that's kind of the beginner level, in a sense, as beginner as it gets with regard to emptiness. Other books that are good, it was originally published as Realizing Emptiness. Now I can't remember the name of it in its later version, but it's by Gen, the Gen. This title that is referred, it literally means elder, and they often use it with regard to some of these teachers. Gen Lamrimpa, just like Lamrim, Lamrimpa. That's all one word, Lamrimpa. Gen Lamrimpa. I think it's called How to Realize Emptiness now in its new incarnation, published by Snow Lion. It has its sections that are maybe a little bit headier, but it does have some really interesting stuff in it. Insight into Emptiness by Geshe Jampa Tekchok, Tegchok, I think is how his name is spelled. I don't know if I have that book up here. Yeah, Tegchok. All right, so that's some ideas of some things that would be useful. And if people have other ones they found useful, feel free to put them in the chat box. There is a wonderful book by Guy Newland. I'm looking up here because on my top shelf are a lot of my emptiness books. The one by Guy Newland is called Introduction to Emptiness, but it's an introduction to emptiness as it's taught in the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise of Tsongkhapa. So it's got a little bit more heady stuff to it as well. But he uses a lot of really interesting analogies. Like for the two truths, he uses the idea of two radio stations. When you're tuned into station A, you're only hearing conventional truth. And then when you hear station B, you realize, oh, what I was hearing on station A isn't the only way of looking at things. And it's kind of an interesting analogy to work with the idea of how we realize the two truths. So those are some ideas. I know that there are a bunch of books that have come out about emptiness, but I don't think that I want to just make a blanket recommendation for some of them, because some of them I haven't even read through. Like there's a new book by, well, not relatively new, by Armstrong. Is it Guy Armstrong? No, can't remember his name. All right, let me go on to the next question. When you spoke of the 10 grounds earlier, were you referring to the very joyous and so on? Yes. Yeah, and again on Wednesday night we're going into those 10 grounds. These are the sort of the demarcations of the path of the Bodhisattva as they deepen their understanding of emptiness after developing that direct insight. Okay, let's get back into the slides I have, because I do have a few more things to share before we end this series. So first I wanted to share some things from Rinpoche's book that I found really quite interesting. And this gets into what we were just talking about with regard to bodhicitta, this aspiration to realize emptiness. He says whether it is more difficult to realize bodhicitta or emptiness depends very much on the individual. If we have studied and meditated deeply on bodhicitta in previous lives, we will probably find it much easier to realize it in this life because of the imprints on our mind stream. Recall that bodhicitta is what makes all of these six that we've looked at perfections. So it is a very important part of our path, and it is the demarcation of when you become a bodhisattva, when you have what we call an uncontrived or spontaneous bodhicitta. So know that again, it is an important one, and if you have familiarity through your past lives, you may find it easy to go through the meditations of cultivating bodhicitta, which again I haven't taught as part of this course, but I think most of you have seen that in various Lamrim courses. Whereas perhaps understanding emptiness is quite difficult for us because we did not study it much in previous lives. After realizing bodhicitta, however, the extensive merit we gain through that means that realizing emptiness will then come easily. So there is some benefit, and Rinpoche does on occasion say that bodhicitta is one of the most important things for us to work on, if not the most important thing. And so if we do generate the merit that comes with that mentality, that mind that is dedicated to the welfare of all beings and wanting to become a Buddha for their sake, everything you do is infused with unbelievable merit. Merit helps you to realize emptiness. We're not used to this concept in our world, right? You know, we go to university or whatever, even if you're still going to some schooling or something, you go, or even what you're doing right now, sitting and listening to me, you think, oh, it's all about my intellect and all about my ability to frame things and organize things and get concepts and da 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 da. Well, in Buddhist terms, that's not the only side of it. Remember, there are two wings. There is the wing of wisdom, without a doubt, and we do need to keep fine tuning our intellectual understanding. But there's also the wing of method, compassionate method, which is where we generate, kind of put all the gas in the tank that gets us to be able to use our wisdom in a much more profound way. Again, I think I shared with you when we were talking about the teachings on the fifth perfection on concentration, how, you know, just having I'm going to sit down and I'm going to meditate on the breath till I get calm abiding. Well, that isn't enough. You have to also have the requisite merit. Otherwise, your efforts aren't going to bring fruits. You're not going to get to the result that you seek. So Rinpoche is saying if we do cultivate bodhicitta before realizing emptiness, well, then that may really help because our extensive merit through the mind of bodhicitta will help us to realize it easily. The best way to fully understand and appreciate the emptiness teachings, such as those of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, or the various Prajnaparamita, perfection of wisdom teachings, is to practice bodhicitta. So this is nice. I mean, he's telling us, you know, without us really attending to the method side, that wing, it's going to be very hard for the wisdom wing to develop. But yes, do what we can on the wisdom side to look at the teachings of Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, all these things that are expounded upon by His Holiness. By the way, the book by His Holiness called The Middle Way is very good, but it is more of a commentary on some of Nagarjuna's verses. But he does teach about emptiness in that at a pretty profound level. But anyway, the idea is if you have bodhicitta, that may be one of the best things you can do to help you to realize emptiness. But then he does say it is the same the other way around. If we have many imprints from studying and meditating on emptiness in previous lives, we will find it relatively easy to realize emptiness in this life, whereas realizing bodhicitta might prove difficult. It all depends on what we've done in prior lives, what sort of familiarity we might have, even with some of the core things of these. For example, bodhicitta. You might not have meditated on bodhicitta, but maybe you highly developed your compassion, your loving kindness in the prior lives. That may lead you to being able to develop bodhicitta much more easily. But in this case, you know, we might have the wisdom side, but we lack the method. Then he says the same thing that we saw earlier. However, once we have realized emptiness, it becomes much easier to develop bodhicitta because we can then fully understand how the self-cherishing mind has us trapped in samsara and so on, and in the self-grasping that is underneath that. And when we see how this has ruled our life, we can then see how it also rules the lives of all sentient beings. From that, great compassion spontaneously arises. So again, we can use the wisdom to inform our method. We can use the method to inform our wisdom, but don't think that these two are standalone qualities. Either we are working on bodhicitta or we're working on emptiness. Rather, we try to do them in tandem, recognizing that they do influence each other. And then he says, generally, however, I would say that it is more difficult to realize bodhicitta than emptiness. Why? Simply because of the many levels of meditation we must pass through in developing bodhicitta. Remember, the two main techniques are the sevenfold cause and effect, which each of those steps is a meditation, quite a long meditation in and of itself, as well as the other technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others that's quite involved. So realizing emptiness does not require this long process, he says. Nonetheless, it also, has its difficulties, as we've seen. However, to realize emptiness, we need more than just intelligence, kind of reaffirming what I was talking about earlier. Being excellent in debating is not enough, and knowing all the emptiness texts by heart is not enough. We must also have great merit developed through strong guru devotion and extensive purification practices. Again, relying upon our gurus is said to be the root of the path. So to that extent, I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot today. I've touched on it here and there, but know that that's a key way that we generate merit, because the role that those beings play in our spiritual development is so great. They become a huge, very powerful object for us. We can generate great merit by following their advice. And of course, purifying. Lama Tsongkhapa himself is said to have done all these, you know, months and years of purification and merit accumulation. And that's what all of these preliminary practices that we talk about at times are all about, what we call the ngundro, the various things that help us to do those tasks of accumulating merit and purifying negativity. He says this produces great pliancy, serviceability, gives us the confidence we can gain whatever realization we wish for. When that happens, a few words can cause us to gain insight into the meaning of emptiness and then attain the realization, even without having studied those extensive scriptures. So he's kind of putting, a lot of money on this idea that if you do accumulate a lot of merit and purify a lot of negativities, things will actually come quite easily, and it might not even require, the great amount of study that you might think it would initially. So. And then a final quote from him. He says, "It is like waking from a sleep. We can suddenly clearly see the object we must negate, this non-existent object, this real I, that until that moment we have completely believed in." So there's already a level of waking up he's pointing out here, even when we can just see the object of negation, even when we can understand what it is that we have been falsely believing in since beginningless time. So I just want to share a little bit of those teachings. They weren't right at the end of this chapter on the perfection of wisdom. They were actually towards the beginning, but I thought they were really quite important to emphasize, is that, we need to do both of these wings, develop both of them in tandem, and then we'll have great success. So these are on your handout. I'm not going to spend much time on them because they're pretty straightforward, and I've touched on them for every single perfection. They're just reworded a little bit differently for that perfection. So supreme reliance, rely on bodhicitta purely as your motivation for practicing wisdom. Again, makes sense. The supreme method, when practicing wisdom, be aware that even this profound practice is merely a cycle of the three emptinesses. The object of wisdom that you're meditating on, the act of practicing wisdom, and the practitioner of wisdom are all empty of inherent existence. We call the three spheres of emptiness. Finally, the supreme dedication, dedicating all the virtues from your practice of wisdom to enlightenment. So again, those are the three supreme qualities that make your practice of wisdom very powerful, get the best and purest results. For the six supreme qualities, you add three more. So supreme reliance was bodhicitta as above. Supreme object, any aspect of the path to enlightenment is a supreme object for the practice of wisdom of analysis. Why? Because we also have to develop our conventional wisdom, understanding karma, understanding rebirth, understanding death and impermanence, understanding all the other topics, the 12 links of dependent arising, and so on. The ultimate supreme object is the true nature of all phenomena, emptiness itself. So again, that's the most supreme of all the supreme objects, but nonetheless, everything is a supreme object if we're using our discerning wisdom to investigate the Buddha's teachings, especially in the Lam Rim. Supreme purpose. The supreme purpose for all your practice of wisdom is to bring temporary and ultimate happiness to all other living beings, maintaining that mind. The method as above, where you have the emptiness of the three spheres, the dedication as above, dedicating to attaining enlightenment, and then supreme purity. Practice wisdom with an attitude wishing to be free from the obstructions to liberation and the obstructions to omniscience or Buddhahood. Again, that's the topic I'm going to start with on Wednesday night, talking about the grounds and paths, because that is how we set out the grounds and paths of a bodhisattva, is how they go about that process of being free from those, removing those obstructions to liberation, being what keeps us from being liberated, attaining nirvana, obstructions to omniscience, what keeps us from being a Buddha, from becoming fully enlightened. Again, I'll talk more about those on Wednesday. And then this again, quite quickly, how we practice wisdom with all six perfections. While practicing wisdom, lead others into the practice. That's, give them instructions as best as we can. That's how we practice generosity of the Dharma with our wisdom teachings. Ethics with wisdom. Be mindful not to break any of your vows while engaged in the practice of wisdom. And don't develop the wrong view I was mentioning earlier, that vows or our actions are empty of inherent empty of inherent existence, so they don't really matter. We can't develop that view that because things are empty, karma doesn't exist, that, our actions don't have any effect, that the vows don't matter, and so on. Excuse me. Let's go on to the patience with wisdom. Be patient with the physical or mental discomfort you may experience while doing retreats or meditation to attain the wisdom perceiving the true nature of phenomena. And of course, patient with your own mind in your development of this understanding. It takes a while, for most of us, unless, like Rinpoche said, you had a lot of familiarity from a past life. For most of us, we're starting from maybe not much familiarity at all. So have to be very patient. Joyous effort. When practicing wisdom, do so with joy and energy, and overcome any obstacles holding you back from realizing the wisdom, knowing the true nature of phenomena. This is why it is useful to have gurus involved in this process. You can go to them and say, well, I'm getting stuck with my realization or my meditations on emptiness. I just don't feel like it's progressing. And they may say, oh, you need to read the Vajracutter, 1,000 times or something, And so then you recite the Vajracutter 1,000 times and maybe then things shift for you. Who knows? But you do so joyfully. You don't, you want to overcome those obstacles. Concentration, obviously, alternate our analytical meditation with stabilizing meditation, single pointed concentration. In particular, use that deep concentration over time if we develop calm abiding, which was the main goal we looked at in the last perfection, to penetrate the true nature of phenomena. Again, we want to bring these two together. Remember the analogy that we had of the light that's being used to look at the painting on the dark wall of the cave, that you need a light that is very stable, that you don't have the winds of distraction kind of making your mind incapable of focusing on anything for a duration of time. Once the candle is stable, though, then you want to increase the light, so that the light actually allows you to see everything clearly. But you want to do both of those. I mean, if you try to increase the light, but the candle's flickering, forget it. It's not going to happen. So anyway, those are how those two work in tandem. Then the final one, how do you practice the perfection of wisdom within wisdom? Use your faculty of analytical wisdom to analyze the profound view of emptiness and determine to do so continuously until attaining enlightenment. In other words, feed that into the cultivation of deeper wisdom. But also, once more, be aware of the sphere of emptiness of the three: the practitioner of wisdom, the act of practicing wisdom, and the object of wisdom as all lacking inherent existence, so that you don't let any of this ignorance creep into your analysis that's arriving at emptiness, because you recall that there is no inherently existent emptiness. Emptiness is empty of inherent existence. Okay. Now, I've been adding on, and there are a number of them for this perfection, the 46 branch vows that pertain to it. Know that the remaining 46 branch vows from numbers 35 through 46 are all set out in terms of branch vows related to our benefiting others. And I'm not going to go through those as part of this course, obviously. The first of these that pertain to wisdom, actually the first two have to do with the Hinayana scriptures, or the scriptures that lead to individual liberation. If we look down on those and say that we don't need to study those, as Mahayana says, bodhisattva wannabes. Well, this is an incorrect view. And right, even the Lam Rim is structured that way, right? We start off with the Hinayana scriptures. We start off with understanding death and impermanence and the lower rebirths and karma and refuge. And then we go on to the middle scope and deal with the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent arising. All of those teachings are part of the Hinayana scriptures. If we were to say they aren't necessary for bodhisattvas to know those, well, then how do they develop themselves to the great scope? You need to depend upon the small scope and the great scope and the middle scope to get to the great scope. So all of the teachings that are taught by the Buddha, especially those in the Hinayana, are very important to study and to have some respect for, because they are essential to our development of bodhicitta and entering the Mahayana path. Secondly, the branch vow number 28, studying Hinayana discourses and practices to the extent that it compromises your study and practice of the Mahayana. So the first one was like not giving enough credit to the Hinayana. Here, you're giving undue credit to the Hinayana and engaging in those discourses and practices to the extent that it damages your sattva activities and your Mahayana activities. So again, your principal practice throughout the Lam Rim and your study of the Lam Rim should always be the Mahayana. That's why when we study even the lower teachings in terms of karma, in terms of rebirth, all of these things, the 12 links, we do so with bodhicitta motivation. Why? Because that is our principal path. So we don't want to get into all of those teachings and neglect our Mahayana motivation or neglect the teachings on the six perfections that I've been going through in this course. We always want to hold that as primary. And so we might have periods of our lives where we need to go into the Hinayana more deeply because it is important. Do so with your Mahayana motivation, though, and don't forget that the main practice is the Bodhisattva's path. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. Know that there is more information on these that you can find. There is a book on the Bodhisattva vows by Geshe Sonam Rinchen that's very good. Number 29, making an unnecessary study. 29 and 30, by the way, have to do with non-Buddhist scriptures or teachings, or topics even for that matter. Making an unnecessary study of non-Buddhist scriptures, thus neglecting to study the Buddha's teachings. Although such study is permitted and is advantageous for understanding and helping others, you should not use excessive time and energy in studying non-Buddhist tenets. So it may be useful at times to examine teachings from other traditions, maybe again the Vedic traditions, since a lot of those were refuted by the Buddha in the various sutras, as well as the discourses of the treatises of the Indian masters. It might be useful to know some of that, and it might be useful even to know conventional knowledge. I often talk about how ignorant I am of quantum physics. Well, it'd probably be a good thing for me to study a bit more about quantum physics, especially since His Holiness, in a lot of his teachings, talks about how it is, to some degree, a stepping stone to get you to questioning the nature of reality and seeing how things don't exist in the way they appear through that investigation that's done in that field of science. So studying these sorts of things can be very useful for our own understanding of Buddhism and for our ability to help others. And, if you have people in your life who are all scientists, well, maybe it's good to know a little bit more about science so that you can relate some of the Buddha's teachings to scientific findings and understandings. But if we make that kind of our principal thing and we neglect once more our spiritual studies and our study of the Mahayana, then that's going to be a fault, because it's putting too much attention on things that are not the real antidote. As much as you understand, people have asked me, well, if somebody really gets quantum physics and how, what's appearing depends upon the subject and all this various stuff, and will they get emptiness? And I'm like, well, no, unless they've had teachings on emptiness, they probably won't. They'll begin to question that reality, but they might still hold that reality to inherently exist. They will still hold the I to inherently exist, because most people don't even question this idea of inherent existence. Unless you're introduced to this idea, I think it's very, 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 very hard to think, oh, I want to investigate whether there's a real me here. Well, who does that? Most people just simply don't engage in that. So it might be useful for us to know various things if we kind of become excessive in that. If we, go overboard, well, then that's going to become problematic in terms of our own spiritual development. Number 30 is still dealing with, again, these non-Buddhist texts, but here favoring, becoming attached to, or cultivating interest in these teachings, even in cases where when you have to study them. You are allowed to study non-Buddhist texts so that you can refute wrong views or to better understand those who are you are trying to help. But instead of doing this, you become attracted, to these scriptures. So again, in the previous one, it was that you weren't putting your effort into the Mahayana. Instead, you were mostly engaging in those non-Buddhist ones. Here's where you go even further. You kind of become totally attached to those things and you become invested in doing those. And you neglect completely, again, anything that you are trying to attain otherwise. This sort of liking them is what defines this number 30 as a separate transgression, a separate branch vow. So, as it says there, you do want to be able to have some additional knowledge to help others. But if you become attracted to these scriptures, attached to them, put all of your time and energy into them, that's going to become problematic. The rest of these all have to do with the Mahayana teachings. Number 31, casting aspersions on the Mahayana teachings, the author or the subject, such as saying a scripture is poor in subject matter, in composition, or in power to help sentient beings, or that the subject is boring. So we have to be careful how we look at the Mahayana teachings to the best of our ability, even if we have a particular problem with a teaching, or we see that maybe again it's not written to the liking of ourselves, that we don't criticize it, we don't cast aspersions on it, we don't do things that diminish the importance of that, because all of the Buddhist teachings, whether we talk Hinayana or Mahayana, but here we're talking entirely Mahayana, all the Buddhist teachings were given as medicine for sentient beings. So whether there are medicine or not, or whether they taste good or not, shouldn't be what determines our relationship to them. Instead, we should hold them with some regard, not criticize them. Um, uh, I don't know if yeah, I think that's probably good enough on that one. Let me go forward to the next one. This is an interesting one. Those of you who've taken the Bodhisattva vows or studied them know that the very first root vow is praising yourself or belittling others. In that context, it's out of attachment to gain or praise, or where we're doing kind of a putting ourselves up, putting others down because we want something. We want to acquire something, praise of others, monetary gain, what have you. Here, it's the idea of doing it out of anger or arrogance, and this is interesting. You might wonder, well, what is this doing in the perfection of wisdom? How does praising myself or belittling others out of anger or arrogance become a problem in regard to my perfection of wisdom? Well, because that becomes an obstacle to being able to learn from others and to learn from situations. Venerable Thupten Chodron, in her commentary, she talks about this fact that it's in this category. She says, this is really emphasizing that when we get into that behavior with a very proud mind, it inhibits the growth of our own wisdom. It's so interesting because often when we get proud and we're praising ourselves or putting others down, we're doing it in an attempt to make ourselves look really good and really wise, right? And what Buddhism is saying is that it actually backfires and produces the exact opposite results because it becomes an obstacle to the development of our wisdom. As soon as we start thinking that we're really top stuff and we know it all, it becomes very difficult to learn anything. I think that's why people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama are just tremendous examples for us, she says, because their example of humility and their willingness to listen open-mindedly to others is incredible. And I agree. I mean, this is really, indicative in who these teachers are and how they present themselves. His Holiness will make no assertions to his realizations of things. He'll often say, well, I've meditated a little on emptiness and have some understanding, or I have a little bit of knowledge about bodhichitta or whatever. And he always just, professes to be a simple monk with no great realizations. So, who are we, any of us who have any sort of knowledge, to boast or to feel prideful about what we know when, here's His Holiness, this, sun in the sky, and we're just like a little, spark, So I think, again, we can see that this can be a problem to our cultivation of wisdom when we think that much of ourselves. And she didn't talk about anger so much, but anger has that same sort of mentality, right? It's sort of, me being up here looking down on you and your actions. It has a little bit of that same flavor. In fact, they often point to pride as being more connected to anger than it is to attachment. Even though you're quite attached to yourself and your view of yourself, you're really quite upset, in the mind of pride, in putting others down, putting yourself up. So I think it's a similar thing. Let's go ahead and finish off these. We've only got, I think, two more left, and then we will be able to finish off this course. Number 33. This is an interesting one too. Again, very clearly we can see how it pertains to our cultivation of wisdom. But not attending discourses, debates, discussions, pujas, or ceremonies. Why? Because of arrogance, laziness, or anger. I mean, some of these are less afflicted than others. If we have a very prideful mind or an angry mind, that's one thing. If we're lazy, well, it's still, not so good, but nonetheless, that is understandable. There are exceptions, of course, with many of these. If we're ill, if we didn't know that that was happening and we missed it, if we suspect that maybe there won't be good confidence in what that teacher is going to say, so you don't just go to anything. When we also have heard the subject many times so that we already know it very deeply, then you're not required in a sense to go to that. And then, when you're developing other skills outside of that you wouldn't want to interfere with going to teachings. For example, if you were really working on developing concentration. And then there may be other factors that would get in the way. But nowadays, of course, with everything being so accessible, I mean, you might look at it, and even if you were to attend everything that Thupten Norbu Ling offers, I don't know that you'd have time to be able to do it all, right? So we do have to, kind of maybe put some conditions on this, because in the days when these vows were being written, is my understanding, I'm putting a little bit of a subjective spin on this, but I think it's fair. Teachings were very rare, and if you had somebody teaching in that locale and you could make it there because you didn't have ease of transport generally, and you could, then there was a fault in not going to those teachings, not going to those gatherings, because it was expected that if that was happening in your area, and I think to some degree we can say that is the case when centers are open and there's some events going on there and those centers pertain to you and you feel like you need to, attend, that you should definitely do that and not skip out on those things. But nowadays, I mean, where you've got so much available, not just TNL's list of things, but then you got all these other centers, not just in the US, but around the world, who are offering things. His Holiness is teaching frequently. How many of us go to His Holiness's teachings when they're right there? They're online on the computer. We could just go right in and have them. So I think we have to be careful to think that this means that then we have to not eat, not sleep, not go to the bathroom, not go for a walk, not do anything that would be maybe another useful activity, because this vow says that we have to not uh, miss these sorts of events and teachings. So I think we have to temper it and just find, again, a comfortable way of working with teachings. Don't completely turn away from them to where you never go to any teachings again, but also don't feel like you have to do everything. There is that thing, what do they call it? FOMO, fear of missing out, which happens with some Dharma practitioners, where like they always want to be at something because they're afraid they're going to miss something if, oh, well, this is happening and I might miss that. But, don't let that be your motivation. You should be motivated because you really want to acquire the knowledge that is being presented by that teacher, and you want to be able to use it in your spiritual practice to benefit others, So those should be the guidelines for why you want this, not so you can put another feather in your cap or something like that. One more, and then we will be done with these secondary vows that I've been, again, tacking on to this just because those portions of our vows are related to the perfections. Not respecting but abusing the guru who gives teachings and shows the path, seeking only his words without contemplation of their meaning. Of course, the first part about not respecting but abusing, obviously this is a huge thing that we want to avoid. Once we've taken someone as a guru, when we've established ourselves in that relationship of guru-disciple, then we want to be a good disciple and, as much as possible, respect the guru. If something happens that we have to part ways with the guru, we still respect them. We wouldn't abuse them or say critical things about them. But this idea here is more specifically that when you go to a teaching, whatever, with somebody, you never sort of deprecate them based on various factors that you might normally be dealing with in mundane affairs, the quality of their speaking skills, the words that they use, all the various, means by which they teach, all these various things that we tend to put a lot of emphasis on in our culture. Instead, we should really look for once more the meaning, the contemplation of the meaning behind the words. I know when Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the very first time I went to teachings with him, this was back in 1997, the first teaching that no, 96, end of 96, when I sat in the Gompa at Sechen Ling. And because he had a habit at that time, at least this was my karma, this is what I heard, was he would clear his throat quite frequently. I didn't get hardly anything of what he said. I mean, I think I got maybe 2 or 3 sentences out of the evening. And I sat there just, trying to do my best to contemplate what he was saying and get at the meaning. But I didn't let it get in the way of my having respect for him, and I really feel that that's the important gist of this. But it's also, even when you are getting teachings in a way that you find challenging or in a way that you don't quite, can't get your head around, you still do the reliance upon the meaning. Don't put too much attention on the package. This is very much in line with what are often called the four reliances, which I'm going to introduce as part of this. The first one is to rely on the Dharma, the doctrine, not on the person. So if you're developing sort of an attachment to that person, but you're not really recognizing that the reason why that person is there as a teacher, a guru for you, is because they want to give you the Dharma, well, then you're missing it. You're putting all your reliance on that person and not really relying on the medicine that they're giving you, the doctrine itself. Within the doctrine, though, we have to rely, as it's said in this vow, on the meaning, not on the words. Some teachers will have, be more erudite in their presentation of material and what have you. Other teachers may not be as, good at that because of whatever. It's karma. Don't go too far in analyzing it. It's just the nature of things. So we have to always rely on the meaning, not on the actual words that are being presented in terms of how eloquent they're being said or what have you. And then, of course, within the meaning, we have to rely on the definitive meaning that are set out in the definitive sutras, which would be the teachings on emptiness, not on those requiring interpretation, which means that, again, a lot of the Buddhist teachings do require some level of interpretation because they aren't teaching the final nature of things. We would rely on those to some degree, but we don't make that our final point of relying. Our point of reliance at the deepest level is what is definitive, the truth of emptiness that we are trying to discern. Then within those definitive sutras and our development of an understanding of those and reliance upon those, rely on wisdom, not on a more superficial knowledge, a sort of dualistic knowledge. And by wisdom, we mean the wisdom that goes to the degree of realizing emptiness directly, realizing what is in the definitive sutras at the deepest level. So we can see these are a hierarchy. We start with just the person who is there in front of us. Don't rely so much on them, but on the Dharma they're giving you. It doesn't mean, again, we don't have a healthy relationship with that person and do things to help that person in their goals, spiritually, like Rinpoche and so on. It essentially means that the main reason why they exist, again, is to give us the Dharma. We have to always go for the meaning of that Dharma, the most definitive meaning of that Dharma, and develop the deepest level of wisdom pertaining to that. So that's all I had to say about all of that. Let me see what people have shared in the chat box to see if there are some other things I need to address before. Okay. Tibetan Buddhism and Modern Physics by Vic Mansfield with a foreword by His Holiness. Good. I'm going to write that down. Vic Mansfield. Okay, good. Let's see. I'm not seeing anything else there. Let me go down a little further. Why isn't it moving? Good. Did anybody have anything that they wanted to ask in person? I don't know why I'm not getting this thing to scroll down any further. I think there were some things there. Maybe that's it. The last comment was from you, Mary, about door to satisfaction. Is that it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I didn't see any questions.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about today, but especially even throughout this course? Or, I mean, anyone? my real hope again was that I realize that there are times when it gets into technical stuff, especially with this last perfection. But my real hope again was that you would begin to see how you can integrate all of these into your life. The whole reason why we have the six perfections isn't so that we think of them as something, oh, well, maybe later on, maybe once I get a better idea of bodhicitta. And then, these are things that you can bring into your life right now, with some level of understanding about bodhicitta, to go about your acts of even the simplest acts of generosity, which is where the six perfections start, right? Just giving, I think I even mentioned this in the teachings on generosity, whenever that was, I don't remember right now, but that even when you feed your pets every day, your pets don't pay you, to care for them. It's not a transaction. Your pets, you're caring for them out of the kindness of your heart, right? You're giving them food because of your desire to benefit them. Well, you can make that into an incredibly powerful act. They use that phrase in the 30 Confession of Downfalls of the 35 Buddhas. Even giving one morsel of food to a being born in the animal realm, one bird seed. If you're giving a handful of birdseed or a whole container of birdseed or whatever, think of the incredible merit that you're getting just by giving that to those beings, and then giving it with bodhicitta. That's really what we're talking about with all of these. Why do they become perfections? Generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom, because you have bodhicitta. So it's really, that's the big emphasis, is to try to do all the acts that you do with bodhicitta, but try to keep pushing the envelope, expanding, transcending your limitations, moving a little bit further in being able to adopt some of these things in your life. And as Rinpoche points out, with that accumulation of merit, with all the things that we do with bodhicitta, things will fall into place. You'll be kind of forced into enlightenment whether you want to be a Buddha or not. So that's what one teacher said once, is like, once all the causes and conditions are accumulated, you'll end up a Buddha whether you want to be a Buddha or not. Not that we don't want to be one, but I'm just saying, that it's all dependent upon causes and conditions. And these six perfections are the best way to create the causes and conditions for your own Buddhahood. And then, of course, for the enlightenment of others. So, and that takes us to noon. So again, I do hope that these teachings have been of some use, and I really appreciate the opportunity to teach on the six perfections to all of you. So thank you all so much. Let's go ahead and do the dedication prayers then. Thank you, Mary, for putting those up. Let's bring to mind those beings who are on the dedication list. We won't recite all of their names, but anyone we've added, anyone that others have added, anyone that we've been asked to pray for or that we've offered to pray for, all of these beings we dedicate for their welfare as we recite these verses from Master Shantideva's text. And again, we'll also extend that out to all sentient beings. Okay.
Gen Don, we'd also like to thank you first. Gen Don, we'd like to thank you so much for these teachings, all the preparation, all of the kindness that you've shown us. So if everybody could just turn on your video, we'd like to offer a Thanksgiving, the mandala, the 2 quick verses, and
Okay.
if that's okay with you.
Sure. Please. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So I'll do the first one in Tibetan and the second one in English. And again, this is Tibetan tradition to thank Gen Don for teaching. Sajipu ki jushing meto tramri rabling ji ni de gen padi Sangye Jingdu Mi Te Huai Drokun Nam Dag Jing La Chopar May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Idam Guru Ratnam Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then we'll go and we'll recite our dedication prayers. And I will mute myself.
Oh, thank you, Mary. I appreciate the mandala offering. It was very kind of you. I'm always enjoy my time with all of you. And so I've been very grateful for this opportunity. So again, as I mentioned before, let's bring all those beings to mind that we're holding in our hearts, as well as just this vast aspiration to benefit every sentient being in the ways that are spelled out by Master Shantideva in these verses. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of our merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. Then this wonderful verse that again encapsulates this far-reaching attitude that we want to have throughout all of our practices. As we recite this together, just generate that mind that's in it for the long term. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we do the prayers for our precious teachers. Again, as we've talked about today, we need these guides, especially to help us on the more profound aspects of the spiritual path, to help us to develop this wisdom realizing emptiness that will give eyes to all of the other perfections, that will help them to all lead to the goal of enlightenment. So let's make strong prayers for the good health and long lives of these teachers, as well as all other spiritual guides. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally for Tenzin Alsohita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Again, thank you all so much. Thank you, Mary. One thing I don't know if anyone's interested in this, but I received an invitation. I have done this before a couple of times to do the prayer before the Senate session in the legislature this Friday. I don't know if some of you might even be coming to the sessions online. I don't know how they're doing all this stuff, but apparently I will be coming in at around 11 o'clock, and I'll do Master Shantideva's prayer. It's one of the best prayers to do in a more broader audience of different people. And so anyway, I'll be doing that prayer on Friday at 11 is what it's scheduled for. When I've done it in person, sometimes they get delayed because of the various committee meetings running over and what have you. But just know that that's going on. Just wanted to let people know that if you are there, you might see me there. So anyway, it's part of my interfaith involvement. So, all right, everyone, please be well, stay safe, and I will see you all again. Again, next week we'll start a new